Welcome to the RTEC session. This is the Rangeland Equipment and Technology Council. If you're not familiar with that group, it's a long-standing group that's been around a lot of years, kind of a part of the SRM, but separate, where we focus on technologies and equipment for restoration work, mostly in the Western United States. But today we're excited. We got a good group of speakers that are going to present to us on seed-based restoration, really the process from beginning to end. And with that, we're going to invite our first speaker, Matthew Benson from Benson Farms, Inc., to present to us on some of the seed production work that they do. And let me just start you right here. And just a note to all of our speakers, because we have a fairly good online contingent, just make sure any questions asked are repeated into the microphone and that you speak into the microphone during your presentation.
I'll do my best, I swear. All right. Howdy, I'm Matt Benson, and again, BFI Native Seeds and Benson Farms. Am I not getting to it? I was trying.
I know.
And a lot of times people ask me about, the native seed supply and stuff, and we're talking about, seed-based restoration technology, and we're going to start talking about seed by looking at hamburgers. Yeah. I don't know, you all had lunch here, hopefully, and so if you didn't, you're going to get really hungry watching this. I figured this is SRM, and I better bring the beef. But back in the 90s, Burger King really nailed it when they said, your way, right away. I mean, that probably still rings in your head. You know that commercial because that's how good commercials and advertising work. I think it's important to note, your way, right away. You can have that customized however you want. You need an extra pickle, they'll get you more pickle. If you want to change that Coke for a Mr. Pibb, you can have it. Whatever you want, they'll make it happen because it's your way, right away. Which caveat may have additional costs for some items. If you switch it, they're going to give you, it's going to cost another dime for that extra pickle. And, so you don't get away with it. You can be your way right away, but it might cost something. And there's a few things you might note about when you look at a picture like that. It might take a little longer to customize. If you say, I need that done, well, it's going to take a little longer. Everything can take just a little more time. It may not look just like the advertisement. Most of you have probably been to Burger King and you've tried to order that exact meal, and it probably did not look exactly like that. It was close enough and you still enjoyed it, made you hungry, but it didn't look just like what we saw there. And it may not be real healthy for you. Every day or 3 meals a day, maybe you can still do it every day, but 3 meals a day, you might be pushing it. So there's always the caveat of your way, right away. And so if you want to avoid those troubles, there's solutions. Henry Ford had a great solution for things like that. You can have it in any color as long as you like it black. It does avoid the trouble. Your way, right away just happens to be the only way you're going to get it. If you like your Model T and you like them in black, then hey, lucky you. If you don't, it's not going to be your way. It's because that's the only option there is. And it might seem silly. You're like, wait, I thought we were talking about seed, and all he's done is talk about hamburgers and Henry Ford. No, we'll talk about seed. I just wanted to set up the idea of, again, native seed supply and the availability of restoration materials. Is a question that it comes up quite often, and people are always wondering, well, why isn't it the way that I imagine it should be? Well, because there may be additional costs for some items. So much like having the Burger King your way, you want the seed your way, there may be some additional costs, I got to tell you. You also may not get exactly what you want. So just like the advertisement picture, you thought you were getting something, well, it's going to be pretty close, it's going to work, but it may not be exactly what you thought you saw. And it may not be easy to get, though. So your way in the right away part, that can be really tough, and sometimes even with enough time, you may not get what you think you need. If you're thinking you're going to plant, I don't know, lupin at 8 pounds an acre on 4,000 acres, good luck finding that much lupin. I encourage you to do that, but I don't think you're going to find it no matter how long you take. Some things just don't happen like that. So there is a solution, though, to all of this. And again, I won't even harp on the crested wheatgrass solution, but we should be planting seed-car from Canada to the Mexican border. I was told to me by a seed company that is not in this room, but I don't know how to say, you guys know your environments, you work on your sites, you try to get them up and running and being able to be, I'll put productive in quotes, but you're trying to make an environment work. You probably don't need a seed-car monoculture or a crested wheatgrass monoculture for that matter. But that's the option. So, I mean, this is what the market can offer sometimes. It's like, well, you want it fast, you want it quick. We got Model Ts in black. Well, we got seed-car. You can have that. That's what will get you. Maybe that's not the best way to approach it, though. Also, I mean, you can have the entirely agnostic approach. I mean, if it's in the name, right? Wildflowers are just in the wild. So you don't really have to do anything because they're like wild. I had this discussion just last week, actually, with a neighbor of mine, because we grow lots of wildflowers and grasses, and they kind of stood there, and I was talking to them a bit, and they're like, yeah, I just don't get it. So again, to some consumers, yeah, seed-car is plenty good because they didn't even know what seed-car is. Snake River wheatgrass, Canada and Mexico is working for everybody. So, but I'm going to, again, assuming this room, if you're sitting here at all, you have an idea that, no, if I'm going to steward some lands and create habitats, there's going to be more to it than just taking your hands off the wheel and letting it roll downhill. And to that end, we all have what we know our native seed strategy: right seed, right place, right time. Not that it doesn't come with problems. I mean, every good idea going to have its problems here, just like we discussed. Additional costs may be incurred. Not everything's going to be your way perfect right away, and it might cost. Well, right seed, you want it for your site, your adaptations, your everything, but it gets pretty specific, you know? So, I mean, that's a very specific form of demand that has to occur. And the way that gets communicated to the market / industry / to the end user / whoever's involved in that chain of events in land management, it needs to be made clear. Right place, that specific growing conditions and needs, what the conditions and timing are to actually get seeds like these sometimes are more difficult than you'd imagine, and getting them right. And the right time. Here is, I don't want to call it a market failure, but most seed demand comes down to being irregular. Did I say that right? Irregular and seasonal. It doesn't occur. It only occurs when something happens. It's not like selling eggs or milk and everybody gets all mad because the price went up a little because they buy them every day or every week. You know, it's very irregular demand. It may or may not occur. I'm going to give you a hypothetical example representative of, you know, a timeline of what seed supply looks like. Because again, the question that comes to us all the time, well, why isn't the native seed supply adequate? Well, why doesn't it have the right seed for me? And why isn't there enough right now? I want it my way right away. You have to take it in steps, and we got to discuss what that takes. So, say you're a land manager, and all of a sudden you need 450 pounds of a local biotype of seed to go into a project in a year. Well, and you're a together person. You got your planning, you have a checklist, you know what to do, you got some people that work with you, you're going to get this done. You might even have a budget, you're funded. Now that'd be a hell of a thing. And so you're going to be able to get the collection done and get an increase contract started. At that same time, hopefully in year 0, year 1, I use year 0. Some people get offended by things like that on a chronology, but I just liked it anyway. So, field prep is occurring. I'm saying a field has to be getting ready for it to be used. Then, if that contract comes along and that seed is collected and it gets to a grower, a producer, they're going to put it in, get it growing. And I'm going to use an example of a juvenile phase, vegetative juvenile phase species. It makes the timeline a little longer, but it might make you appreciate the fact that certain things like achnotherums, festucas, lamus, oh my goodness, all these things require multiple years before they hit the physiological maturities that actually make them seed producing, entities. They take time, and they got to be healthy to get there too, not just time. So that happens. You get an initial harvest. So you thought you were going to be planting that project with that 450 pounds in 1 year, but it turns out that it took all the way to year 3 for it to actually have a harvest that you could then receive and go plant that project. So your project gets seeded. Great. And guess what? That field's still in. It harvested again. So that's great. You have more than enough, hey, out there exists in the market. There's enough seed for projects that could come along. That's wonderful. Project comes along right after that grow out. Oh no, fire event right next to that road closure that went out, and you would need 6,800 pounds of seed. Well, there was a little bit of excess from your project there. You got over 1,000 pounds of excess, but it doesn't cover the 6,800 pounds. So then you're trying to engage, you're trying to be, you're a good steward of land. You're trying to work with your vendors. You're saying, we need to get this up to speed again so we can take care of these things, right? Let's work together. I agree. Let's do that. What happens? So that field gets planted again. And it's going to take that time, though, because that juvenile vegetative phase, you're going to be at least 2 years till that initial harvest. There's harvest. And guess what? No foreseeable need occurs. And another harvest. Now, all of a sudden, you have 10,000 pounds. You're ready for an event, and there's no market. There's nothing happening. And so you're like, well, the supply wasn't there when I needed it. And now you have the right seed, but I don't have the right place or right time for it. So it's not working. It's these continuous disconnects in that supply demand. The biological supply lag is a very real problem. So what happens? We take our problems and we come at things. So we try to use markets. And I talk about what happens with markets. You either get the Henry Ford solution or you get the very, very high cost solutions. So markets are solving a problem. You need something to plant there, they'll give it to you. They might also be creating a problem. Well, then we can take care of the problems caused by the market by adding in some government solution. So the government will do some mandating and add some legality to everything, and that is going to fix it. Well, it fixes some of the market problems, but it makes its own problems because all of a sudden everything just slowed down. We just poured cement in the business model by adding bureaucracy to it. So everything goes and grinds to a halt. And you also end up with a lot of, I'm going to call it pickiness, right? Because it can get very legalistic when you start using policy to drive every decision you have. So, well, technology will save us from both of these things. We just need something better. And, well, something better. Technology also runs into a problem. Again, every time you try to fill a hole, you're digging a new one. You're going to get that dirt somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. And so technology doesn't solve it either necessarily. Well, we've bred a better thing. It'll work better. Except, well, yes, it is aggressive in some environments, so you don't want to plant it in these places. But how are you going to stop it? Well, we'll have the government mandate again. Oh, okay. Well, but yeah, if they mandate it, then the market would need to know to grow it. And so you can see how you go up and down the scale of problems, and you keep filling holes by keep digging holes. Tough problems. So yeah, every time problems get solved, new problems get created. I call it doing the Pontius Pilate. You know what? This is what happens when I run into hard problems. I like to just give up and make some rules. I don't want to talk about the issue. I'll just make rules. And if it doesn't fit, then I have a reason for giving up because it didn't fit my rules. And then, of course, I can shift it. I can blame it on somebody else. Well, technology didn't serve me well. Well, the market didn't serve me well. Well, these regulations didn't serve us well. So these are all things that we like to do with many problems in our lives. And so it happens in economics too, even in these seed markets. So maybe dealing with hard problems like this is not the right way. Ways we could deal with it. I'm offering partial solutions. I'm not saying these are all good solutions. But again, when people ask me about native seed supply, I always say, well, what about native seed demand? When you look at demand, we really do still have a demand problem. Demand is going to drive supply, especially in a high lag situation. It's just that the demand has to be consistent or still exist when the supply comes to market. Difficult. And, I don't want to get too political, but I was at BLM last year, and they said in the last 5 years, we've spent up to $90 million buying seed for all the reseeding efforts they do. And I sat there and goes, wow, I mean, that's great. $90 million in 5 years across, 10, 12 major seed companies in the West. That's wonderful. That's equal to about 3 minutes of that little support of the Ukraine war. So, I mean, where we are on the priority scale then of half a continent, or, well, we'd rather run a war somewhere else. That's your demand problem. That's your supply problem. It really isn't a priority. $90 million spread across 12 companies across 5 years. And you wonder why you have 200 million acres that are in trouble in the American West. It's not a question, is it? It's actually just a series of facts. So, whoops. Oh, I went too far. Discuss your expected demand. If you get and talk to vendors or talk to anyone, if you've got to communicate what you're going to need, that right seed part of the problem. Contracts are great for evening out demand. That supply leg problem, if you have a contract, you're creating demand by using things like that. Storage in systems engineering and design. When you build a system, you add storage, you create greater capital stocks. Greater capital stocks then can deal with the periodic or difficult, irregular seasonal demand flows that occur on those stocks. I went past pragmatism. I mean, okay, I guess I'll say it. If it's not in your seed zone, it could be in an adjacent seed zone. You could still use it to plant it. If there is a technicality, well, it has, one common weed seed too many for our project, but, we don't want to do it, then the whole project doesn't go forward. I get it. We all want it our way right away. Does that mean that then we shouldn't do anything? We should go back to our give up and shift blame. And no, that's not the way to deal with a hard problem. Pragmatism is. So if you can be pragmatic, you can have it your way right away. And I would have no problem giving you that or a whole pallet of seed. I'll spritz vanilla above it and bring it to you if you want it. But again, there will be additional costs along the way. All right, all done. Any questions? Why does the demand side have to be so event driven and irregular? Why is there not planning involved? And planning can take place on 2 levels, which is a very, very good point. One, we could build better environments that should have fire periodically at every 20, 40, 60, 100 year interval, whatever you'd like to pick for that particular climate that you're in. But yeah, and native communities do great when they burn. That's what they're supposed to do. they're structured to do it. It's great. But when they're not built that way, and then from the other side of that also is you can do the planning, even if you're going to be event driven, to sit there and say like, oh, let's not pretend that a fire isn't going to hit these areas, and a fire of what scale and size during what time period. Everybody likes to say, oh, well, we haven't had a fire for 6 years, so we're probably never going to have a fire again. Well, no, that's probably not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you haven't bought seeds for 6 years. There'll be no seed to repair a fire in 10 years when it does come, because you didn't spend the last 5 years, have a contract and buy 1,000 pounds a year, put it in storage, all the things I was using in my partial solutions. Again, not perfect, but part of the solution that when a large irregular demand occurs and you do need the right seed, you can at least have some of it. Again, addressing the pragmatism issue. Some is better than none, for sure. That cover that question, sort of? All right.
I think we're going to need to move on, but definitely catch Matt after the meeting. And this is what this is for, is talking some of these realities of the world. So we're going to move to our next speaker. Yes, please applause for Matt. Matt really covered the field production. We're going to move into wildland collection of seed and what that entails. And we've got Jason Stevenson from Stevenson Intermountain Seed to talk that.
Thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk to you guys about what I do. We collect wildland seed on commercial scale. I'm not nearly as eloquent as Matt, so I just stick to the nuts and bolts. So hopefully you don't fall asleep. So Stevenson Intermountain Seed is a 2nd generation family owned seed company. My father started the company in 1976. I'm the current president and owner of it. And our primary focus is on native seed. Much of that native seed comes from wildland collected sites on a commercial scale. So what what is wildland seed? Like Matt's neighbor, like it's just wild. Like why do you need that? It just grows automatically. Well, some areas do, but we define wildland seed as seed collected from stands occurring in a natural environment, rangeland, forested areas, or seeds that are from stands that are not specifically grown for production. So who needs this? Short answer is we all know who needs it. Ranchers, land managers, federal and state agencies, energy companies, wildlife and mine. A lot of those guys, they collaborate on projects, and luckily we get to be a part of that. So it's a lot of fun to see those projects come to fruition. So my little part of that is how do I get the seed to those end users? So there's a lot that goes on here, and it takes know-how. And we got to know what species to look for. We got to know where to go look for it. We got to know when to look for it, who to get permission from, when to collect, whether the stand's good enough to collect, whether the seed's good or not, how to collect it, how to take care of it, and then ultimately how to get it processed and in the bag. So I'm going to hit on each one of those just real briefly. Each one of those topics could honestly, I could give a talk on each one of those. So how do we know what species to look for? Some of your customers are very specific. They want seed from a certain area. And sometimes, yeah, that takes years to get as much seed as they need, like Matt mentioned. So communicate early and often with them. We try and do that with some of our customers that need specific seed. But there are public seed bids, federal and state. They typically ask for the same kind of what we call workhorse species year after year. So really, we know what we can sell. So those are the ones that we're going to try and go after. And just because we can get a certain species doesn't mean that anybody's going to want it. There was a nice patch. I forget the name of it. It was spirea. I told my dad about it. This is, years and years ago. I was so excited, man, we can get a lot of seed. Yeah, nobody wants that. Have you ever seen that on a bid? No, but there's a lot of it out there. Well, okay, nobody's going to want it. So we got to know what we can sell. We do lots of driving. So these are some of the areas that could be potentially harvested for wildland seed. A lot of 55-mile-an-hour botany in the middle of Nevada. So you'll slow down to see what's out there. We use a network, it's not just me out there driving. There's a network of people that we work with to go out and scout these areas. Knowing when to go, like this is a really good example of, same species. Like if I go out too early looking for a certain species, this is globe mallow, I pretty much have to be standing on top of that plant to be able to see it, right? But if I can wait and time it right, this one on the right here, man, that's a whole lot easier to find. So a good rule of thumb is to go when it's flowering. And then so we found our patch. We got to find out who owns the land. So a lot of it here in the West is BLM, Forest Service, state, private, tribal. Each one of these have challenges with getting permission to collect that seed. Some of the challenges are, the BLM or state office just, they're just not doing permits this year. Sorry, it's drought, no permits. And that happens. Or the permit process is too cumbersome and it takes way too long. This native seed has a very short window for collection. I'm going to hit that a little bit later. But it can take, some offices say, well, you need to give me 6 months in advance. Well, I don't even know where I'm going to be in 6 months. So that a lot of times, not a lot of times, but that does happen. Or a private landowner, even though you find some on his land, you can try and sweet talk them. They just don't want you out there. And that's okay. That's their prerogative. On the bottom here, I've, competition will beat you to it. I'm not the only one out there doing it. It's a highly competitive business. Little story here on this. This was an area of annual sunflower last year. It was maybe 20 minutes away from where I live, not too far. So I thought, oh, we can go get that. So I know the landowner. So we got permission. I'd gone several times throughout the seed ripening process and checked it. And I'm like, okay, last time I went to check it before we were going to come in and harvest, this is what I found. Somebody else got in there and beat me to it. And what had happened, I was really mad at the time, but what had happened, it was family owned land. And I talked to one member of the family, the other guy talked to the other member of the family, and they didn't talk to each other. So it just happens. So it's, on a first come, first served basis sometimes. How do we know if the stand's good enough to collect? Just because there's some pretty wildflowers out there, are you going to get enough seed to make it worth your while? Like the picture on the top left, yeah, that's some arrowleaf balsam root. I believe that one is northern Nevada or northern Utah. The two pictures on the right, the one in the middle, it's an old picture. I like old pictures. That one's in northwestern Colorado. That one's in central Utah. As a seed collector that gets paid by the pound, you know where I'm going. Unless my customer needs it from a very specific area and they're willing to pay more. Yeah, we'll go get that other one. But just some things that, to take into account what we have to go through and look for. Some things. The next, I guess we need to know if the seed is good. This is an example of shad scale saltbush. This one's pretty cut and dry. Cut it open. If it's empty, it's probably no good. Cut it open. You can see the white in there. It has fill. It's good, probably. We look for bug damage. Look for off-colored seed. Anything that might make you think twice about collecting that, putting your time and resources in, because we don't have the time to go out and collect a little bit of seed, send it off for a test, and then wait, a couple weeks till the test comes back and decide if it's good or not. We don't have that luxury. So it's a lot of in the field judgment calls. So next we got to know when to collect it. This is our Goldilocks method. Not too early, not too late, just right. Obviously, you go too early, you get immature seed, and that still happens. You go too late, and it's on the ground already. We want to hit that just right, and timing is key. So on these native species, there's typically a very short window of when actually collect this seed. So like I mentioned, we'll go back and check sites multiple times before we can go and harvest. So how do we collect? This is what I'm going to pitch to the federal government. Well, I was till Elon Musk took over, and I'm not going to do it anymore. But many of our collections are done using a manually operated inertia creator paired with a manually held seed collection receptacle. Sounds very technical, and it is. It's just as basic as that. A lot of tennis rackets swinging into a trash can. It's a very labor intensive process. There are some species that can be used. We can use our sweeper machine for it. How do we handle it? A lot of our wildland collected seed needs additional drying. If we leave that in the bag coming out of the field, it can mold up pretty quick. So we need large amounts of open floor space. Often, we need to add an extra heating and air to dry it quicker. In fact, we do a lot of that in the fall in our fall shrubs, because the window for delivery is from harvest to delivery is so short. So this is something that I like. I'm a mechanical. Like I said, I'm nuts and bolts. So every piece of equipment we have, we've either built ourselves or we've customized it in one way or another to make it usable for our end users to flow through the drill or even the broadcaster. And this often requires, you know, taking off a tail or a wing or, you know, some kind of plume without damaging it, because it's not, they're fragile. We can't damage that seed. Otherwise, we did all that work and we can't just run it through the hammer mill. It ends up breaking the seed and we get paid nothing for it. So if we can overcome all these challenges, in the top left, that was a patch of globe mallow that the grasshoppers got before I did. There is nothing left to that wildlife. Mother Nature does not like seed collectors. I found that out. Competition, poor seed production, weeds. We got to stay out of the weeds. Otherwise, we can't sell our seed. Bad seed, wildfires, no permits, or too late. And depending on how things go, sometimes we don't have much seed to sell, or if the planets align, we can have a warehouse full of seed so you guys can get your projects done, and you know, good things happen. And that's all I got. It really species, it depends on the year, but it can be, you know, 20 to close to 100, and each one of those species, we got to keep the location separate too. I didn't even hit on the source identified part. That's an additional step where a third party comes in and verifies the source of that seed. So it does require a lot of tracking on all of our seed lots. Yes. Okay. Yeah, almost all of our collections are source identified. Yeah.
So we're going to shift gears. So, you guys, we've been discussing the seed industry and that aspect of it, the production side of it. Now we're going to shift over to how to actually get seed back onto the landscape, to the plants that we want. And so our first speaker on that vein is going to be Katherine Fitch with BFI Native Seeds as well. So welcome her.
Hello, my name's Katherine Fitch. I work with Matthew, and those were two great presentations to kind of preface what I'm going to speak with you today. Hopefully you guys will get some nuggets to help you in the positions you're in. I've worked with BFI since 2016, and prior to that, I worked with the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, and prior to that, with the Forest Service, and working in restoration ecology over that time period. So with BFI, in addition to providing seed grow out and seed sales and wild collect services, we also provide consultation services and implementation of wildland restoration projects. And we collaborate with tribes, state, federal, local, private organizations and land managers to help with post-fire projects, to help increase biodiversity across the lands that they manage. And this is what I'm calling today our restoration wheel. And these are all steps that we take, that we have found over the years to increase the success of wildland restoration. And so you start with your site history. It's very important that that sets the foundation for everything, your species inventory. From there, plant material development, with which Matt and Jason spoke to quite eloquently. Site preparation is key, reducing the weed seed bank. Then you go with your seeding, post-planting weed control, and forward planting if needed. So we've found just taking these steps and being patient and realizing your timelines work pretty well in success for wildland restorations. Unfortunately, there's some that are missed, and some folks overlook or don't have the education or the experience. So we try and help with that. And you guys might want to chime in, because I know there's a lot of experience in this room. But I've identified 6 common mistakes that are missed in your restoration wheel. And when a friend of mine was gracious enough to listen to me practice on this, she said, there's only 6. I said, well, there's more, but I chose 6 just to start. So the first one, lack of site knowledge, and to familiarize yourself with the format, each mistake in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see those bubbles of the restoration wheel, and a portion, whatever's the portion of that restoration wheel, those tines are affected by that particular mistake. So lack of site knowledge, that affects the entire restoration project. If you know what you have, if you have a landscape that looks like one similar to the left, which is annual invasive cheatgrass, little pobobosa in their dominant community, or do you have something like one on the right that's fairly intact community? That's going to dictate your post-fire scenarios. If you know the lands you managed prior to that, it's going to give you the tools to say, let's just leave it alone. We don't need to do anything. It's going to regenerate on its own. Or with your landscape on the left, it might give you an opportunity, a restoration opportunity to restore those lands. What's the site capable of becoming? That's an important one, because that's going to set your stage of your timeline. That'll give you your goals. That'll set all your performance criteria. Herbicides needed, what sort of species you're dealing with for site preparation and post-planting weed control, and the seed mix that you use. And there's been, I've got a couple stories in my presentation. We were assisting private organization, to go and drill seed for them last fall. So I got them a quote, got their maps, figured out where everyone was going, got everybody lined up. And I thought, God, when I called Matt and I said, can I take a look at their seed mix? So I looked at their seed mix. It was really heavy in blue branch wheatgrass, Sandberg's bluegrass. God, I thought that site was really sandy. So I pull up the soil survey, super sandy, like crazy, crazy sandy. So, but they had already had their mix set. They were gung-ho, we're going to seed this mix. And well, we could incorporate some Indian rice grass or maybe some sand drop seed. How about some needle and thread? It's expensive, but we can do it. Nope, we're going with our seed mix. It's like, all right, we're going with our seed mix. So that's what we did, but the chances of success for their particular project are very low. They even did half their site with mycorrhizae to see how that would affect it was an experiment. So it's like, gosh, I wish they could start with their base, their site inventory and their site history, what soils they have. So that's key. So lack of knowledge about your site, number 1. Number 2, I think we've covered that. So I'll have some time saving here. Plant material development. If you subscribe to the idea of biodiversity in a landscape that is adaptable, adaptable and resilient, you'll have a better chance of success utilizing local ecotypes and securing your seed source. So that takes time, as we know. It can take, depending on the species, whether it's grass or forb, and I think Jason and Matthew hit on that quite well. So we'll just move on. Number 3, lack of site preparation. So we have this super clean field on the left. Is it really clean? It looks ready to go. It looks ready to plant. But what was the species inventory prior to that? Was this just a 1-year Kim fallow, or what's hiding in those soils? It's like you can get everything ready to go, try and compress your timeline for seeding, and end up with this the following spring, which is a field of cheatgrass. So there's that field was seeded. There's native grasses somewhere under there, but that's a lot of work to play that back. Whereas you could you know, you're just increasing your timeline more. You got to either go back, start over completely, or go through and mow it before it goes to seed. You know, you could try and salvage it, but it's all very costly. So you're not only adding more time to your restoration, you're adding additional costs. So one story with this one, another client called us up, had their seed mix, beautiful seed mix, late cereal seed mix, and wanted to quote to seed soon. So we probably would have seeded it last month. And typically we like to go out to the site prior to bidding on it, just to get a feel for what the equipment's, you know, is it accessible via equipment? What's the landscape like? How rough is it? What's the soils like? But that wasn't gonna happen. You know, we needed to do it now. Their way, right away. There you go. So I said, is there a possibility you could go out to the site and take some photos? He said, sure. So about an hour later, I get the photos, and beautiful photos, beautiful bluebird day. And I see it had burned. It was a post-fire site. And I see this green fuzz all over. I was like, oh boy. So I emailed him back. It looks like you have a flush of cheatgrass. He said, oh yeah, that and bentonata. It's everywhere. And I thought, I said, you know, maybe, you know, have you thought about doing any site, you know, further site preparation, maybe some pre-planting weed control? He said, gosh, I guess so. But I said, because seeding into that right now is costly. You have a really nice seed mix. It looks like a good site for equipment, good access, but too many weed seeds. So lack of site preparation right there. Number 4. So this is something that I think should be number 1, but it's number 4 still. And this is a common problem that we have. There's certain sensitivity, there's certain native species that are sensitive to higher rates or conventional use of herbicides. And you can really, again, set back your timeline of your project by misapplication of herbicides. For example, the first spray after your fall seeding. So you go in the spring, you're like, wow, look at this flush of broadleaf weeds. We got this. And then you treat it with a higher rate of, you treat it with a higher rate of 2,4-D. Well, you're going to lose a lot of those seedlings that have germinated and come up and we're doing well. And there's also kind of a sweet spot to do that treatment. You want the grasses just developed enough. So sometimes you have to wait. So the important thing is not to rely on your chemical company, salesmen or representatives, or your residential, commercial, industrial vegetation management companies, the farmer down the road. It's just good to have a baseline knowledge of herbicides within the context of native plant restoration. And it's very important. Number 5, lack of monitoring plugs into every component. So monitoring, I think Jason keyed on it, you know, just plant material development. You got to go in, and there's a lot of time to that site preparation, post-planting weed control. And there's a confusion. It's basically monitoring and maintenance of the site are part of the follow-through of the whole thing and the sustainability of your entire project. So it's kind of the hub of this restoration wheel. And it's important to distinguish between qualitative monitoring, which is probably arguably the most important throughout your time period. So you can get your treatments seeded. So your wild collect is right there where your seed is perfect for collection, all the way through where your weed treatments are timed just perfectly at the growth rate or phenology of the species you're treating. Quantitative monitoring. Some of these specs that I see in these projects are like, oh yeah, you just go by once a year and just check it. It's like, okay, well, I guess they're talking quantitative monitoring. Do they have a performance criteria? Like what are we monitoring for? So that's important to distinguish between qualitative and quantitative monitoring. And if you're doing quantitative monitoring, make sure you have a performance criteria. Is it 20% native grass coverage, percent coverage? So that's key. Last but not least, unrealistic expectations. If you look at this site on the left, it's beautiful. It's when we worked on near Wenatchee, that was kind of close to here. This is 8 years post-planting. So it takes time. You got to be patient and be realistic about your restoration timeline. What site did you have? What was a reasonable timeline for success? What's attainable? This harks back to knowing the lands you manage. Over management in post-planting too. You got to know when the scales have tipped enough in your planting. Like there might be a little cheatgrass here or a flush of Russian thistle there, but overall your native species are resilient and adaptable. And once they get going, if you do it right and you're giving, we're essentially giving Mother Nature a nudge and helping with succession. So be patient and walk away when you can, because if you keep going in trying to manage your weedy species, oh, we got something here, you're disturbing the soil more, and then you're going to create another problem. So you're extending your timeline. So just having that knowledge of knowing when those scales have tipped. Summary, know the lands you manage. Make sure you've got your seed stocks secured. Keep them stored separately so you can tailor your mix suitable to each site you might have. Site preparation typically takes at least 2 years in most sites that we deal with. And don't rely on salesmen or regular vegetation management folks or the farmer down the road for your herbicide prescriptions unless they know something about native plant restoration. Monitor frequently and be patient. I've included some resources. There's the Shrub-steppe restoration manual that's a little outdated, but is very useful. Hopefully at some point we'll get an updated one. We're always here to answer questions, consult. And then the Burke image gallery is always great for site history and species inventory. Although they are kind of west centric here in Washington, and it is restricted. I know, like Wyoming, this might not be useful. And then, of course, the web soil survey.
Brittany Allen from the NDOW is going to present on kind of the larger scale efforts.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. As you said, my name is Brittany Allen. I'm a habitat biologist at the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and I am a seed and soil biologist as well there. I'm going to be talking about some of our seed-based habitat restoration that we do in Nevada. So I'm going to start with the why we need to seed in Nevada. Most of Nevada is the Great Basin, except for the southern portion, which is Mojave. And since we are mostly Great Basin, most of our habitat is sagebrush steppe. And these maps show the condition of sagebrush steppe habitat across the state from the late 1980s to the present. And you can see that they're broken up into habitat conditions there on the bottom. The greens are the shrublands and broken up into good, intermediate, and poor based on the proportion of perennials, shrubs, and annuals in the systems. And you can really see the difference in the yellows and reds that have kind of taken over our state. Those are the annual dominated systems, both annual dominated shrublands, where there's still somewhat of a shrub component in the system, but mostly annuals, and then those that are just complete cheatgrass monocultures. Pretty depressing. We've lost almost half of our sagebrush habitat across the state. And as wildlife managers that manage for wildlife in these sagebrush habitats, we think that it's absolutely necessary to step in and make sure that we can get those habitat values back on the landscape for our wildlife. To do this in Nevada, partnerships are absolutely key. 85% of Nevada's federal land, mostly BLM, which is the yellow color, but also Forest Service and some Department of Defense, national parks, so on, listed there at the bottom. We coordinate with our federal land management agencies on NEPA to make sure that wildlife is protected and impacts are avoided as much as possible. We also work very closely with the ESR and fuels programs across the state to plan projects for wildlife and cost share and contract to make sure we can get as much done as we can. We also have multiple assistance agreements in place with these federal agencies that help us with that cost sharing and contracting just to be able to get more done. A lot of Nevada is also checkerboard, private and public. So we have a lot of very key relationships with private landowners across the state, and this allows us to step in to kind of be able to cross ownership boundaries to get those treatments more contiguous across the landscape, because wildlife don't really care where the fences are. They'll go where they need to go. This is also really key when we do seedings and we would like to rest those areas from grazing for a couple years to allow those seedings to establish and be able to get healthy and persist into the future. And so if we have those standing relationships with private landowners and operators, they're usually a little more willing to work with us on that. We also work a lot with our NGOs. These relationships are absolutely essential to what we're able to do. They do a lot of fundraising and they wrangle a lot of volunteers to help us get work done for our smaller projects so that we can have our resources for the larger landscape level work. And then we also, I'm sure you've heard, green energy development is very popular right now, especially across Nevada. So we have a lot of relationships with developers to try to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts for wildlife. And then we also have the conservation credit system, which is state law, and it requires these developers to mitigate offset to sage-grouse habitat. When it comes down to it, partnerships allow us to leverage each other's resources and fill gaps so that we can do habitat restoration for wildlife. We use seeding as a method to rehabilitate areas within 5 years after a fire burning. This is more a reactive method, as they were talking about earlier, rather than proactive. A lot of this work on federal land is done under emergency NEPA, so that allows us to get out there real quick and make sure that we get seed on the ground or pre-emergent herbicide, whatever we need to do. NDOW's role in these types of treatments is coordinating closely with the federal agencies, as I mentioned before, to prioritize wildlife values in these burned areas. We also work with the non-federal land ownership to make sure that we can make those treatments contiguous and cost share and contract. We also restore priority wildlife areas that aren't as recently affected by fire in a more proactive sense. These might include areas that burned a little while ago and have become infested by invasive annual grasses, using a combination of herbicide with seeding. Or areas that are just lacking a sagebrush component where we can try to speed up succession a little bit and get sagebrush reestablished for the wildlife that need it. We also seed in combination with our pinyon juniper removal treatments. If the understory is somewhat depleted before we go in and remove PJ, we might seed beforehand to try to give that understory a boost once we cut those trees. A lot of these types of projects are constrained by NEPA availability. So we work really closely with our federal agencies because that timeline is so far out, just to make sure that we are prioritizing the areas that are most important for wildlife. Sometimes we're able to do multiple treatments in one area, whether that project just requires multiple entries for different methods, or in years like the past couple where we just haven't had as many fires, we might be able to go back to older projects that didn't do as well and kind of redo it. When we're developing our seed mixes, we have multiple considerations. Some of them are from the 10,000-foot landscape level view, and then others more from my 5'6" view. From the 10,000-foot view, we work with the landowners and the land management agencies to make sure that we have the NEPA that's required and to drum up the funding that we need. We make sure all the stakeholders that are involved agree on our plan. We look at the size of the area, the terrain, and the accessibility to figure out what implementation methods we can use. And then finally, we also need to make sure we have a plan of where we're going to purchase the seed from, when we're going to get it, how to get it to the site, and also how to store it until we are able to get it on the ground. The logistics side of these projects is highly understated and definitely takes up most of our time, and they're very important. From the 5'6" view, we look more at those ecological site characteristics and the wildlife values, what can grow on the site, as Katherine was talking about, what we should be putting there or should not be putting there, and what the wildlife needs for those habitats. We also need to weigh whether we can use all natives in our mix or whether we should hedge our bets and include some non-natives. I'll get into this in my next slide a little bit more, but sometimes it is necessary for us to hedge our bets in Nevada in our harsh climates. And then also we need to consider the physical characteristics of the seed, what the PLS is, or how viable all the seed is that we're getting, how big it is, whether it'll fit through drill hoppers, bridge up the sagebrush or the airplane hopper, all that kind of stuff. So Nevada is the driest state in the nation. Our average, according to Climate Toolbox, is 9.7 inches, which honestly surprised me. I was thinking more like 7. But this does also include our 300+ mountain ranges we have across the state and those high elevation precip zones as well. Most of the time we're working in the lower elevation sites that don't recover as well on their own, which definitely are more in that 5 to 8 inch precip zone. And this can be a challenge because not only is our average declining according to that trend line, but it's also very unpredictable and variable year to year. And that makes it very difficult for us to plan these projects around those precip trends. The map on the left shows the general source locations of a lot of the cultivars of native species that we have available on large enough scales for us to use. The orange line around Nevada is the Great Basin boundary, and you can see that a majority of the cultivars that we do have available aren't sourced in the Great Basin. The species might be the same as what we have in the Great Basin, but they're sourced in areas that have very different climates, precip zones especially. And so this makes it really difficult for us to justify spending a lot of money for a lot of these natives, knowing that there's a very low chance that they can survive in our climate. Thankfully, in Nevada, we have a very passionate interagency group called the Nevada Native Seed Partnership. We've been working for, about 8 years now, I think, to try to increase the availability of locally adapted seed for Nevada. And if you'd like to learn more, their website's here, or you can just reach out to me. We design our mixes around the PLS seeds per square foot. That's the best representation of the viable seed we're actually putting on the ground. For drill seeding, we try to stick to at least 25 PLS seeds per square foot, and for aerial seeding, we'll increase that since we're not getting that seed to soil contact that we want. We also have developed standard mixes that kind of help us forecast our seed needs and kind of plan out our seed purchasing in advance so that we have what we need on hand to avoid those application bottlenecks. And I just want to put in there that one of our main prescriptions for seeding does include that site prep that Katherine was also talking about. Most of the areas we're seeding in have cheatgrass in them already or in surrounding areas. And so we definitely need to rely on using that pre-emergent herbicide plus a 1-year fallow before we seed to make sure that we can remove that competition for the perennials that we're trying to put into the ground. Our typical application is 6 to 8 ounces of imazapic per acre at 2 gallons of formulation per acre. I'm going to go real quickly through one of our big examples in Nevada. In 2018, the Martin Fire burned over 400,000 acres across northern Nevada, and it was pretty much all sagebrush habitat. And so as the wildlife agency, it was a huge priority for us since it was sage-grouse PHMA, pronghorn, deer, elk habitat, among everything else that uses sagebrush. And so we teamed up with 2 different BLM district offices to prioritize areas, develop seed mixes, share cost of seed, contracting, everything that goes into all of this. And then this happened to also be the year of the month-long government shutdown right in the middle of our application season. So thankfully, since we had those existing partnerships, we were able to step in and kind of take over all the contracting that needed to happen during that period. Some of the areas that didn't burn as hot did okay coming back on their own, and others literally looked like the moon. This was 1 year after we seeded this area. We dubbed it the Gobi Desert because it was very windy and formed these giant dust clouds every time we were out there. And you can see that it had a really hard time recovering. It's considered a Loamy 8 to 10 high resistance resilient site, but it was a very old sagebrush stand and had very little understory. We aerially and drill seeded with a native non-native mix that fall, and then the winter precip that year after that winter after seeding was even high, and a year afterwards it still looked like this. Another year and 2 and 3 years after application, still looking pretty rough, not much establishment. These were also pretty bad drought years, but thankfully Elko BLM had additional resources to put towards this. So they did another drill seeding on top. That's that persistence piece. And we were really lucky and had record winter precip that year. And now it looks like this. It's awesome. Huge success story for us. Something else we did out here are sagebrush seeding strips. We seeded this in the winter of 2018-2019 at 1 pound per acre, 1 bulk pound per acre. And 5 and 6 years later, you can see the strips very clearly on the landscape. This just shows, you know, if we didn't put the seed on the ground, how long it would take for this resource to come back for the wildlife that rely on sagebrush so heavily in this area. We have examples like this all over Nevada. This is an older fire from 2006. This picture was taken 16 years later. And usually when we seed these strips, we seed perpendicular to the prevailing wind direction so that those strips will infill over time. And you can kind of see this on the left side of that picture a little bit. Another way we use seed is for seedling planting. We use seedlings in areas where we might not have enough seed to seed large areas, or for species that don't do as well establishing from seed, like antelope bitterbrush, or in areas that are just very important habitat, and we want to make sure we have a better chance of getting those shrubs back on the landscape. We also do a lot more seedling planting down in the Mojave. There's much less seed availability in the Mojave, so it's much more worthwhile to put that seed into seedling production. We use contractors and volunteer planting events, or do smaller projects just in-house. We use bare root and containerized stock, and we've played around a little bit with some soil amendments. This is basically to show that seeding is kind of our go-to option for basically everything except for that higher chance of survival. It's a lot cheaper, you cover more area, you're putting out millions of potential plants per acre. Accessibility is much less of an issue. Storage is a little easier. Transport, application, all that kind of stuff I already covered. Some future directions, as I mentioned with the NNSP, we are trying to increase the availability of locally adapted seed. We also have the issue of drill seeding on some of our rockier sites and rely on aerial seeding quite a bit, but we are using some new to us seeding methods that we've kind of learned from Kevin and his coworkers in Utah, using a chain harrow or smooth chain or Ely chain following seeding to try to increase that establishment. Incorporation of more forbs as they become available, more centralized infrastructure in Nevada, and then partnerships and education. That's it. Make it. Question was, why do we do sagebrush strips instead of just seeding the entire area? Working on areas like this, 430,000 acres for one fire, that's a lot of area to cover, and our resources are pretty limited year to year. And so when we have the resources for a fire, we need to take that opportunity and do what we can there, just because it's not promised that we can go back into the future. So the strips kind of give us the opportunity to cover more area with the hope of that infill with the prevailing wind direction into the future.
Could I maybe add one little thing there? We've also shown that rate does matter, and to concentrate a higher rate in these areas, you get better success in that area. So it's a way of, like Brittany said, spreading out, but still getting enough seed on the ground in where it's needed.
So the question was, is the seeding timing for the strips different? For sagebrush, it's usually not available for us to use until about January. It's harvested October, November, cleaned, and then once it makes it through the whole system, we get it in about mid-January. So compared to drill seeding, it's much later. When we drill seed, we try to do it in the fall before the ground gets too muddy or frozen. So yeah, sometimes we'll drill seed in the fall, our grasses and our forbs, and then we'll go back over that same area with sagebrush aerially. And it also establishes better at not being buried as well. Yeah, the question was, why are our rates so low? We definitely prefer to use higher rates if we can. For us, it's more about triaging and being able to do more across the landscape if we can. Those rates that we developed were just kind of based on experience of people who were in this position before me and on the districts before me. But yeah, as more research comes out, it's definitely saying that the more seed you put on the ground, the better chance you have, especially in the drier areas. So for us, it's mostly funding availability and seed availability, frankly.
All right, our last speaker. So we've covered a lot on the application, and there were questions about the monitoring and as well, but also looking into the future. So we got Dr. Beth Newingham from the ARS here to tell us about a program that they're working towards.
Thank you, Kevin, and the invitation to share with all of you a new project that we're trying to get both on and off the ground, which is called Seeds. And I'm going to share with you some of the challenges and opportunities we've had with this particular project. And in this case, we're focusing on post-fire rehabilitation. So as many of you know, there's been a large departure in vegetation conditions within the Great Basin. You can see on the map on the right-hand side here, we have lots of areas that are in orange, and Brittany also was showing this, particularly in Nevada, that there's a lot of disturbances that are happening, and we're losing a lot of sagebrush habitat, about 1 million acres annually over the past several decades. And this is even despite all the conservation efforts and things that people are talking about today. So some of the reasons for this are the increases in our non-native annual grasses, conifer expansion, and the changes in both of those are really shifting our fire regimes in particular. And also other land use modifications are changing habitat in these areas. So one of the biggest drivers of change in the Great Basin and many other areas is changes in wildfire. So these two graphs show you the area burned on top and the number of fires below over the last 60 years. And you can see that for both area burn and number of fires in the 80s, we start to see increases. And then we really see this tick up in the 90s, and it really hasn't stopped since, right? And so we also see changes in fire frequency, or the number of times burned. Again, in those last couple of decades, you can see areas within the Great Basin have been burning 5 times within that time period. These systems are not well adapted to have that frequent of fire. In particular, sagebrush is not good at recovering after fire. So this really warrants that we need to be doing something after fire in order to rehabilitate these systems. So there's a lot of post-wildfire seeding, aerial seeding, drill seeding, lots of other treatments. One of the biggest programs is by the Bureau of Land Management with the Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program. They're spending an average of $33 million on these ESR treatments, or post-fire treatments, and 86% of that is actually spent in the Great Basin. Again, we have a lot of fire happening in this particular ecosystem. And unfortunately, we still are at that mixed success stage. So we're hoping to think about ways that we can increase success across the landscape. So this is a graph. This is pulled from the Land Treatment Digital Library. This is since 1950. On the left-hand side with the blue line, you can see the number of new species per treatment. And the green line here shows you the number of treatments that are applied per year. So if you just focus on the green line first, we can see that starting in 1980, we start to see a drastic increase in the number of treatments that are put on the ground. And these are post-fire treatments specifically. And then in the 90s, that really skyrockets. Again, that matches the previous graph that I showed you, where we have substantial increases in fire. So what's interesting, if we think about the number of species within a treatment in the blue line, we can see from 1950 to about 1980, we're getting new species in there. But since then, it's really kind of flattened out. So this suggests that we're having lots of treatments go on the ground, but we're not necessarily dramatically increasing the number of species we're using. We're using the same species over and over again. So as a group, we were thinking about the opportunities here and what kind of knowledge can we gain by looking at the number of treatments that are on there, what species we're using, what seed mixes we're using, et cetera. So I like to think, and this has been covered in other talks too, but I'd like to think about all the factors that affect a seeding success. And I think we're pretty good at thinking about the vegetation piece of this. So we think about the historical plant community and the previous plant community prior to that wildfire or disturbance. We're much better at thinking about diverse seed mixes. Where is the seed source? How are we going to treat these invasives? We also think about what is going to be the post-fire land use and what is the wildlife habitat. So we need to think about what's going to be the post-fire grazing regime, what are the recreational uses, again, what are the habitats for that particular site. We also talk about how climate's going to affect our seeding, but we really have very little science behind this piece of it. We all think precip does. I would like to also mention that I think temperature plays a big role, but again, we don't really know much about this. And then of course, recent and predicted weather is also going to influence the success of your treatments. Another piece that I would like to put in your brains today is that what your fire regime is also important. How many times is it burned? How frequent is it burning? What is your burn severity after a particular fire? And then my favorite box, which just happens to then be the biggest box on the slide. And previous speakers have also started talking about this, but we really need to be paying attention to our soil and site conditions when we're doing a seeding. So slope and aspect, what's your rock cover, soil type or soil texture, do you have biocrust, do you have physical crust, chemical crust, hydrophobicity. So there's really a lot in that box that we need to be thinking about. So trying to take a more holistic approach and trying to increase that success on these post-fire rehabilitation efforts, we've developed what's called the SEEDS project, which is the Seeding Evaluation and Experimental Design Strategy. So this is a multi-partner group, and our intent is to design, implement, and monitor experiments that evaluate seeding practices. We're trying to explore novel seeding techniques and also analyze these treatment effects on multiple ecosystem components like I just showed you. And in order to achieve this, we've been coordinating and leveraging resources from multiple partners. And then also our intent is to be able to share this knowledge in order to improve our seeding practices. So I think we're all familiar with the adaptive management cycle. And right now we probably have what we're going to call a standard pace of knowledge, where we're installing treatments with sort of incremental changes, small little changes. And one of the points of seeds is to sort of increase that pace, get an experimental pace where we're putting in novel experiments to accelerate our learning. So we've established a couple of sites I'm going to share with you in a minute. And this is sort of the process that we have gone through in order to do this among the scientists, the managers, and the operators. So the first process is that we're waiting for fires to happen. And then when we do find fires, we reach out to field offices or whoever we know that might have a particular site. We then work with them on co-producing what the project designs might be. I'm going to give you two examples that are both with BLM, but we can work with pretty much everyone. So state agencies, conservation groups, private landowners. We then work with practitioners to designate leave areas so we can put our little treatments within their bigger project. We then implement those treatments. And again, the examples here today, we have, for the two that we have overlaid some treatments with existing treatments that they were already placing on the ground. And then finally, we're going to monitor and evaluate to determine whether or not those treatments were successful. So again, we're taking that ecosystem approach. We're trying to build this, and I'm just going to show you what we have as far as methods so far. Again, we have been developing this for maybe 4 years in concept and 1.5 years, maybe less than that, and actually getting some stuff on the ground. So I'm going to talk to you about how we've developed methods for the vegetation, the climate, and the soil and site part for now. So our vegetation sampling, we are trying to make this AIM compatible so it can be used with other data sets. So we're collecting cover using line point intercept, vegetation height, gap intercept, and photo points. And this was alluded to, someone asked a question about pre-fire seedings and that sort of thing. This is a big question for me is what is your fuel load after you do post-fire seeding, right? Pre-fire, can we change what those fuel loads are? Are these seedings actually reducing your fire risk? And then also because we're planting all these cute little species that we all know and love, we're of course doing the seedling counts for those particular seeded species. So for the weather and soil sampling piece, we have a weather station that's installed at each site, and then we have a couple of sensors. So we have soil moisture and temperature sensors, as well as soil matrix potential sensors, which give you an idea of the plant available water in the soil, as well as evapotranspiration. We're also doing soil chemistry. So we're collecting soil cores where we can get total carbon and nitrogen, we can get macro and micronutrients. We're doing other things like pH and electrical conductivity, and we also are assessing plant root mass. And so we can do that over time throughout a seeding. Also hitting the soil nutrient thing again, we can look at nutrient dynamics over time by putting in what we call resin strips. And also Brittany gave the perfect example of the Gobi Desert. And this is something that I work a lot on, which is post-fire wind erosion. And so because after that fire, you have a big opportunity for soil to move before any vegetation gets on that. So we're also monitoring sediment flux. And then again, we're trying to tie these soil properties to plant responses actually. And so we're looking at microsite effects too, like in furrows and outside of furrows. So for our, we have two sites that have been established, the South Tom in Southern Idaho last year and the Wilder Fire this year. For the South Tom Fire on the left, you can see a map, and we're working with the Boise District BLM. So a couple concerns here, small fire, but it's slick spot peppergrass habitat. They put broadcast seeding over that. We went in with two different drills to compare those, either the Range Master drill, which is a locally modified drill there, and a minimum till drill. And you can see the differences, at least physically, on the soil surface. So on the left, you can see we have 10 blocks there within the South Tom Fire. We're monitoring an unburned, no drill, but burned, minimum till, and then Range Master. And then on the right-hand side, you can see again, blowing up those blocks, we have no drill. And then we have our two drills either with or without seed. So what happens if you just disturb the soil surface? And then I'll talk about problems in a minute, but for this particular site, we plan to put tarps to exclude that aerial seeding. But if you don't grease your cookie sheet and you put cookie dough on it, or you put the tarps on top of soil, you're going to get really sticky. So we ended up not doing that. So that was a lesson learned there. The Wilder Fire is Northwest Nevada. This is with the Winnemucca District BLM. You can see their ESR map over here. The pink is aerial seeding. All the stripes are hand planting, and then the green is herbicide plus drill seeding. So we kind of nestled ourselves in the green portion there. And we did our own drill seeding at this site. And on the left, you can see the map where we have undrilled, drill with seed, drill without seed. And then we have herbicide and no herbicide places. So challenges. So some of these you guys are going to be very familiar with as practitioners, and others are sort of unique to this particular experiment. So coordinating with offices. Oregon had so many opportunities for us to do it, but they were so overwhelmed that we decided we weren't going to bug them with yet trying to install something else. So that was a challenge. We're also very spread out geographically as a group. So getting out to sites can be difficult. Of course, everyone knows purchasing and contracting can be difficult. We're now not sure if we're going to get our herbicide contract on this spring. It's supposed to happen in the fall, and now we're having all kinds of issues there. We don't do this a lot as researchers, so storing seed and equipment has been an issue. Again, those partnerships are super key for us. And of course, funding, and we just lost some of our funding, so that's always a continual issue that everyone knows. And then for implementation, again, weather, you've got to have the right soil conditions, not too much snow, site access, equipment. This last story is we were delayed a couple of weeks because we needed trailer weights to balance the trailer. So that was another issue that we did not know about quite yet. Monitoring, of course, is super important, getting those crews out, people cancel out on you, those sorts of things. So we're also committed to making sure that this is all public knowledge. So we're creating a database for all this to go into. We want to make sure that we have products that managers can use. And also we'll have field tours and workshops, and those will be facilitated through the Native Plant Project and the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange. So we would love to have people collaborate with us. We do have handouts in the room. So you can figure out what our goals are, what kind of sites we're looking for, and our contact info. And lastly, we're really trying to just build a concept here. We want this to go beyond the Great Basin, to go beyond post-fire rehabilitation, and think about, you know, how can we create a community of learning for practitioners here, where we're taking managers and scientists and operators and forming these groups where we can increase our knowledge of these restoration practices. Oh, I forgot one more thing. And the fact that we all have differences in shared resources that we can bring together as well. And from our knowledge of 2 sites, those vary fire by fire. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh yeah. How much time do we need to coordinate with us to get a site? Okay. So if you want to talk to us now today, that'd be great, but sort of grease those wheels ahead of time so that we can, because there's always clearance issues and those sorts of things. So if you're interested in collaborating with us, to do it as soon as possible. But if you do come up with a project that is sort of like, I didn't know I would have this ideal project, still contact us. So yeah. I mean, and post-fire restoration things happen quickly. But it's also important for us to be able to fit into all that clearance. We haven't gotten tripped up on that yet, but that's another place that could be a little tough. So there's no, if there's any tape seating. So there's no tape seating. We were putting tarps on top to eliminate the aerial seating that the BLM was applying.
So the preliminary research we've looked at, we don't have like a recommended rate, but all we know is traditional rates, which have been about 1/4 to a 1/2 pound bulk, is too low. That's not significantly different than not doing anything at all. What we're kind of telling people, obviously it's situation contingent, but I would say 1 pound PLS rate is not crazy. So you're talking that 4 to 5 pound bulk sometimes is not crazy, but yours was 1 pound bulk and you were seeing good success with it, right?
So we looked at that several years ago. There's I'm trying to remember where Bowman Prideaux is the paper. I can get that for you, but that's another concern of mine is, again, what are your fuel loads and is that increasing, right? I mean, you go into some of these stands and you see very high biomass in these post-fire situations, right? We go from a shrubland with open interspaces to sometimes a grassland, right? And so we don't know a ton about how that affects fires. We do have a project and a proposal in for Joint Fire Science to continue to look at some of that. But I think these are the questions we need to be asking for sure.
But we appreciate you guys' attendance and hopefully looking forward to seeing you guys next year, having another great symposium next year on that. So again, another round of applause for all of our presenters.